Imagine waking up to headlines that shake the entire African continent. A young African leader has just called on one of the most stable and Western-aligned countries in southern Africa to join a military alliance that openly rejects foreign influence. That leader is Ibrahim Traoré of Burkina Faso, and the country he has singled out is none other than Botswana. The news spread like wildfire. Politicians were stunned, analysts were speechless, and ordinary Africans rushed to social media to argue, debate, and speculate. Why Botswana? What does this mean for Africa's future? And most importantly, could this be the beginning of a new chapter in Africa's struggle for independence and unity? Stay with me, because this story might just be the most shocking political twist Africa has seen in years. It was a calm afternoon in Ouagadougou, the capital of Burkina Faso, when President Ibrahim Traoré stepped onto the podium. The young leader, barely in his mid-30s, carried the same fiery energy that has made him a symbol of defiance against foreign domination in Africa. His speeches are never ordinary. Each word seems carefully chosen. Each phrase aimed at awakening a continent that has long been divided and controlled by outside powers. But this time, Traoré's message was not directed only at his people, or at his fellow Sahel allies in Mali and Niger. This time, he looked far beyond the desert sands of the Sahel, and his words sent shockwaves across the entire continent. With a firm voice, he declared, "Botswana has always stood as a proud African nation with dignity. Now is the time for you to stand with us, not with those who exploit Africa." The room went silent. Journalists shifted in their seats. Analysts blinked in disbelief. Social media lit up within minutes, with hashtags like Frak Botswana AES and Tak Traore Shock trending across Africa. The idea that Burkina Faso's leader would publicly call on Botswana, a country thousands of kilometers away in southern Africa, known for its stability and strong ties with the West, to join the Alliance of Sahel States, AES, was unthinkable. For years, the AES had been dismissed as a temporary pact between nations plagued by coups and insecurity. Western commentators often mocked it, predicting that it would collapse under pressure. But now, with Traoré's bold invitation, the AES suddenly looked like something far bigger. It was no longer just about the Sahel, it was about Africa as a whole. Ordinary Africans reacted with mixed emotions. Some were thrilled, calling Traoré a visionary leader who dared to challenge the old order. Others were skeptical, asking whether Botswana would ever risk its global reputation by aligning with nations labeled as radical by the West. But one thing was undeniable. Traoré had changed the conversation. He had dragged Botswana, a country rarely in the spotlight of African geopolitics, into the center of a storm. And in doing so, he forced the entire continent to ask a question it had avoided for too long. What if Africa truly united under one military and political alliance? This was not just a speech. This was a challenge to the status quo, a spark that could either burn out quickly or ignite a fire that might reshape Africa forever. At first glance, many wondered why Traoré would single out Botswana of all countries. After all, Botswana has little in common with Burkina Faso, Mali, or Niger. It has never experienced a military coup. It boasts one of the continent's most stable democracies, and its economy has thrived for decades thanks to diamonds and tourism. To many, Botswana seemed like the last nation that would ever be pulled into a revolutionary military alliance. But Traoré's choice wasn't random. It was deeply strategic. First, there's geography. Botswana sits at the heart of southern Africa, bordering powerful nations like South Africa, Zimbabwe, and Namibia. If Botswana were to align with the AES, it would break the regional monopoly of Western-backed blocs like SADC, Southern African Development Community. In other words, it would open a southern front for Africa's independence movement. Second, there's symbolism. For decades, Botswana has been praised by Western think tanks as a model African state. Stable, democratic, cooperative with the West. By calling on Botswana, Traoré is essentially saying, if even the West's strongest allies can turn, then no African country is beyond liberation. Third, there's economic influence. Botswana may not have oil like Nigeria or gold like Ghana, but its diamond industry is globally significant. If Botswana were to pivot toward AES, it could use its resources to support an alternative economic framework, independent of Western financial institutions. And finally, there's the psychological impact. Traoré knows that inviting Botswana is not just about gaining one more ally, it's about sending shockwaves across Africa. Imagine if the darling of democracy in Africa suddenly sided with a bloc seen as anti-West. It would shake Western influence to its core and inspire other countries to reconsider their positions. Analysts have already warned of a domino effect. If Botswana even entertains the idea of AES membership, countries like Zimbabwe, already skeptical of Western control, might follow. Namibia, which has strong ties with liberation movements, could also shift. Even South Africa, with its long history of challenging global injustice, might feel the pull. So while Traoré's call seemed shocking at first, the logic behind it was undeniable. By targeting Botswana, he wasn't just inviting one country, he was daring an entire region to rethink its loyalties. This is why the speech rattled so many governments. Because if Botswana were to move even slightly toward AES, it could trigger a chain reaction that might completely redraw Africa's alliances in the 21st century. Traoré's words didn't just echo across Africa, they rang loud and clear in Washington, Paris, London, and Brussels. For decades, Botswana has been one of the West's most trusted African partners. Unlike the troubled states of the Sahel, Botswana has been a symbol of stability, free markets, and cooperation with Western institutions. Now, Traoré was daring to flip the script. Western governments quickly reacted. Officials in France described the call as reckless provocation. American think tanks warned of destabilizing consequences if Botswana were to realign. British media ran headlines portraying Traoré as a radical populist trying to spread chaos beyond the Sahel. Behind the scenes, diplomats began pressuring Botswana's leadership. Reports surfaced that Western ambassadors had privately warned President Mokgweetsi Masisi about the economic risks of even engaging with AES. Aid packages, investment deals, and defense partnerships were suddenly put on the line. But here's the problem for the West. The more they pressured, the more ordinary Africans sympathized with Traoré. Social media exploded with support. Memes compared him to historical figures like Thomas Sankara and Kwame Nkrumah, leaders who once dared to imagine a truly independent Africa. For young Africans especially, Traoré's defiance is magnetic. They see him not as a radical, but as a man unafraid to confront the powers that have drained Africa for centuries. The West is panicking because they know he's speaking the truth. One Twitter user from Kenya wrote, "If Botswana joins, the game is over. This is why Western officials are nervous. It's not just about Botswana. It's about the idea Traoré represents. An idea that Africa can say no to outside control. An idea that alliances can be built on African terms, not dictated by Paris or Washington. Whether or not Botswana ever joins AES, the West now knows one thing. Traoré is not afraid to challenge even their closest allies. And that makes him one of the most unpredictable and dangerous leaders Africa has seen in decades. Dangerous not to Africa, but to the global powers that have long benefited from Africa's divisions. Inside Botswana, the shock was immediate. President Mokgweetsi Masisi suddenly found himself at the center of a geopolitical storm. Traoré's words had put him in a position he never asked for but could not ignore. On the one hand, Botswana's entire modern identity has been built on stability, good governance, and partnerships with the West. It has attracted foreign investors, built a thriving economy, and maintained a reputation as one of Africa's most democratic states. Aligning with AES, a bloc often portrayed as anti-West and militaristic, could jeopardize decades of progress. On the other hand, the winds of change are hard to ignore. Across Botswana's universities and youth forums, debates raged. Students argued that Botswana should seize this opportunity to lead a new African era of independence. Why should we always depend on the West? asked one young activist in Gaborone. Botswana can be the bridge between southern Africa and the new Africa Traoré is building. Older politicians and business leaders, however, warned of severe risks. They pointed out that Botswana relies heavily on Western markets for its diamonds and Western tourists for its economy. Joining AES could mean economic suicide, one businessman told reporters. The dilemma is real. Masisi cannot simply dismiss Traoré's call. It would anger younger Africans who increasingly see the West as exploitative. But he also cannot rush toward AES without risking Botswana's economic lifelines. Caught between these two forces, Botswana faces a historic decision. Do they remain the West's reliable partner, or do they take a bold leap into a new, uncertain, but potentially transformative alliance? As one political analyst put it, Botswana is standing at a crossroads. Whichever way it turns, Africa will never look the same again. Whether or not Botswana ever accepts Traoré's call, the impact is already massive. The AES, once dismissed as a fragile grouping of coup-led states, has now forced Africa to confront a bold question. What if unity was truly possible? Traoré's invitation to Botswana wasn't just about expanding membership. It was about sending a signal to every African leader. The time of silence is over. No African country is too small, too stable, or too distant to join the cause of independence. Across the continent, the reactions have been electric. In West Africa, pro-AES rallies celebrated the speech, waving flags and chanting slogans of unity. In Southern Africa, citizens debated whether their governments should stay tied to Western powers or consider a future aligned with African-led alliances. The real shock is not Botswana itself, it's the realization that Africa's political map could change dramatically in the coming years. For decades, alliances were predictable. Countries either leaned west or stayed neutral. But now, with Traoré's boldness, nothing feels certain anymore. And perhaps that's exactly his point. By daring to dream of Botswana in AES, Traoré has forced Africa to imagine possibilities it never considered before. As one Burkina commentator said, even if Botswana doesn't join, Traoré has already won. He has shown that Africa's destiny is not written by the West, it can be written by us. And so, the question lingers in the air. Is this the beginning of a new African era, where the continent finally unites to control its own destiny? Or will Botswana's hesitation mark the limits of Traoré's vision? Whatever the answer, one truth remains undeniable. Africa is watching. The world is nervous, and Ibrahim Traoré has once again proven he is not just a leader of Burkina Faso, but a symbol of Africa's rising, restless spirit. Whether Botswana accepts Traoré's call or not, the truth is clear. The continent will never be the same again. The Alliance of Sahel States is no longer a small bloc fighting for survival. It has become a movement that dares to challenge the entire African order. For the West, this is a nightmare. For Africa, it is a test. Will nations continue to play by the rules of old empires? Or will they write a bold new chapter, one built on unity, courage, and independence? One thing is undeniable. Ibrahim Traoré has once again shaken the world. He is no longer just the leader of Burkina Faso. He is the face of a rising Africa. And the question now is not if Africa will change, but how far that change will go.